Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 26 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent, and it is a book by Brennan, and as always, we're going to go over the copyright information, which is, of course, A Natural History of Dragons, copyright 2013 by Bryn Noonschwander, all rights reserved, interior illustrations by Todd Lockwood, maps by Rhys Davies, and designed by Greg Collins. In the last part, the gang, Lord Hilford, Mr. Wilker, Jacob, and Isabella Camhurst, they all went on a horseback ride with the Boyer, Mr. Kurzov, and they were attacked by a dragon. That's basically all that happened in the last part. Also, they all have suspicions of what really actually happened, and so it's kind of shocking. We're going to see what happens next. Okay. One of the Bolskoy men gave Jacob his horse and led the lamed one on foot. It seemed we were going back to the lodge, though I dreaded the place. I would be glad to have a roof over my head, concealing me from a dragon's gaze. The beast had done me a service, though the breaking of my thoughts away from fears of conspiracy towards other matters of equal or perhaps greater importance. Soto Vor to my husband, and the skirling, so the foreigners would not understand. I said, could it be the gunshots roused the dragon to such fury? It did not stir until after Lord Hilford had fired. To an immediate cause, perhaps, Jacob mused, glancing back at the place where the rockworm had been napping. But if you meant an ultimate cause for the attacks, I doubt it. The locals shoot game all the time. If that upset the dragons, these incidents would have been a constant thing all over Vistrana. True. And yet one of our drivers had shot at a wolf not long before the attack on the road. Ilgish had been shooting rabbits. Even the boy who brought me the sample of skin had said he and his father were hunting deer. It was not enough to constitute proof. As Jacob said, there were many other shots fired in this region, and not all of them brought down draconic wrath. It was, however, the closest thing to a common factor we had observed, and might be significant. Back at the lodge, we had little opportunity to speak privately. Mr. Wilker must have managed to say something to Lord Hilford, though, because shortly after supper, Jacob conveyed a message to me. We'll look for an excuse to leave if there is a danger, though that may provoke him. For now, we stay. My first instinct was to protest. I had spent an entire afternoon dwelling more and more obsessively on my desire to escape this place, to have the prospect drawn back felt cruelly unfair. And if there were danger, should we not leave sooner? Yet I immediately saw Jacob's point about provocation. So far, Kurzov had offered no violence to us. The violence I suspected him of, moreover, was purely theoretical. I am, and was even then, a scientist. When I find myself with an uncertain theory, my impulse is to gather evidence that we prove or disprove it. Jacob is capable of sleeping under any circumstances. I am not. I lay awake quite late. I lay awake quite late that night, and finally could endure the uncertainty no longer. Moving quietly, I rose and stuffed myself into the most easily donned of my dresses, tucked my notebook into my pocket. Working by touch alone, I located the candle and matches at the bedside, which I would light once I was safely away. When I lifted the latch on the bedroom door and stepped out into the corridor, where I promptly fell over something on the floor. It was a soft but bony something, and it swore as I need it in the stomach. The voice was Dagmira's. Extricating myself from the girl and her blankets and wondering if my heart was going to pound its way right out of my rib cage, I hissed, "What in heaven are you doing there?" "Sleeping, or trying to," Dagmira hissed back. I, I scrambled to my feet and dragged the bedroom door shut before we could wake Jacob. By the time that was done, I understood for all my airs about needing Dagmira. I had not asked where she and Iljish were being housed. It seemed that Kurzov had no room for them, or else was fond of the old ways, where servants slept outside his master's door, or at the foot of his bed. This gave me entirely a new reason to detest the man. Dagmira, for her own part, quite rightly demanded to know what I was doing. "Snooping," I said. "Will you help me?" She knew me well enough by then to take my bluntest and audacity in stride. We collected the fallen candle and matches and went downstairs, where we discovered that despite the late hour, I judge it to be midnight or nearly so, someone else was also awake. We heard noises from the vicinity of the kitchen and stole quietly in the other direction toward the cellar door from which Rossi had emerged that morning. It proved to be locked. I lit the candle and examined the latch, unwilling to be thwarted so easily. From what I could see, the lock was of a simple sort. The key acted to pivot a narrow bar on the other side. The gap was just large enough to admit the cover of my faithful notebook, which nary a tinge of remorse, I tore the cover off, and with its length was able to reach through and lift the bar, allowing the door to swing open. Stairs led downward into a veritable sink of Rossi distinctive and unpleasant odor. Dagmira followed me with the candle, its light bobbing and dancing with each step. And then, when we reached the bottom, the flame reflected off 100 glassy surfaces. The cellar was no taxidermist's workshop. It was a chemical laboratory, the likes of which I had never before seen, and have only seen since on the premise of a university. I lacked the proper names for most of the things I saw: bottles and beakers and retorts, rubber tubing, and large shallow tubs. Poor judge of such things, though I was, the entire array must have cost a fortune in transport costs alone. Dagmira touched the candle flame to a pair of lamps, brightening the room so I could see further. The light played over a well-used notebook on the table, crates and chemicals underneath. I knew their labels would be familiar before I even looked. Chiavorin make, most of the names unknown to me, but the sulfuric acid to me immediately recognizable. So Astamir had indeed gotten it from here. But why? The answer, or at least part of it, lay at the far end of the room. There was no question of mistaking the bones for ursine or lupine. I had drawn their like in the open air, hurrying for fear that they would disintegrate before I could record all the details. I had seen mineral-encrusted samples preserved by some trick of chemistry in the great cavern near Drustanev. Here they lay in an enormous pile, uncounted numbers, far too many to come from a single beast, not with this stack of femurs against the wall. Dragon bones, processed in this laboratory so that they would not break down. My breath stopped at the thought. With what Rossi had developed, we could study them with vastly greater accuracy. We could answer mysteries of anatomy and osteology, and that had puzzled dragon naturalists since the founding of the field. But he did not want them for study. Of that I was sure. He had intended to sell them to collectors. He would have kept each individual's skeleton separate, and he would have preserved all the bones. I saw none of the smaller, more irregular components. The only and only one skull placed atop a table in a manner of a trophy. The rest were roughly sorted, and, and they were long bones all, femurs and humeri, and great curving ribs. Here we have a picture of Rossi's laboratory, and the dragon skeleton and the dragon femurs and stuff like that. My hands trembled as I reached out and picked up a rib. Even in those days, with my limited experience in animal physiology, I marked the extraordinary lightness of the thing. It was necessary. The weight of ordinary bones should never have allowed something so large as a dragon to fly, and with the bones of birds. Oh, and where the bones of birds were delicate, these were tremendously robust for their thickness, or they would have collapsed under the burden of muscles and organs. Acting on sudden suspicion, I gripped the rib and tried to snap it across my knee. It did not give. Dragon bones, perfectly preserved as if they were still within the body of a dragon. How many had Rossi and Kurzov killed to achieve this success? Behind me, I heard Dagmira gasp. It broke me from my stunned contemplation of the bones. I turned and found her standing, candle holder almost slipping from her nerveless fingers, staring into the palm of her other hand, where something small gleamed. I went quickly to her side. What is it? Wordlessly, she extended her hand to me. The object was a ring, a small, cheaply made signet. The emblem, when I examined it, bore words abbreviated in a manner I recognized as Chiavorin. In a voice made right with fury, Dagmar said, "This is Gendrick's ring, Gretelkin." "You are sure?" "That is the school he went to in Chiavora after he ran away from Drustanev. It did look like a university ring, and when I turned it over in my fingers, I found letters engraved on the other side of the face. J.G. Not Rossi's own ring, then. It was proof enough. We had to leave the lodge as soon as possible, all of us. But when I slipped the ring over my thumb and turned with Dagmira to go, we found new light descending the stairs. A moment later, it emerged into the cellar, and it was borne in Gaetano Rossi's hand. His surprise, I think, was for finding two women in his laboratory. Our lights would have long since given away that someone was prying about in his things. I wondered briefly whom he had expected. Jacob? Lord Hilford? In his other hand he carried a plate of sausage, cheese, and bread. A midnight snack, I supposed. To fortify him in his work, he laid it down atop his notebook, not taking his eyes off us, and then said, "Well, what do I do with you two?" He spoke Chiavorin, of course, which Dagmira would not understand. I imagined she could make out his tone well enough, though speculative and threatening. Licking my lips, I answered in my own tongue, hoping to flatter our way out of the cellar. "Your work is remarkable. Men have tried to preserve dragon bones before, but so far as I know, you're the first to succeed. It's a tremendous discovery for science." Rossi dismissed that last word with a sneer. "Science is for withered up old men in dusty rooms. We have better plans for those bones, stronger than wood and lighter than steel. What could we not do with that?" It was not at all what I had expected him to say. You are talking about industry?" "I'm talking about wealth," he said, "and power. The nations of the world already squabble over iron, and that will only grow worse with time. The man who can offer them an alternative will be able to name his price. Despite the circumstances, which should have held my attention very firmly indeed, I could not stop my mind from leaping to consider Rossi's point. Stronger than wood and lighter than steel, yes. As braces or struts, dragon bone would be worth, well, far more than its weight in gold, but you could not build an engine out of it, not by rivets, not by riveting ribs or ilia together, unless you had some notion of how to. That was as far from my thoughts got before Rossi put down his light and picked up a knife. But never mind what I'm doing with the bones, he said. The real question is what to do with a pair of spies. I had thought myself frightened when that rockworm attacked us on our way to Drustanev, or when I believed us stalked by an ancient demon. It was nothing, I discovered, to facing a man who might be about to murder me in cold blood. Threats from natural sources I can handle calmly. Threats from humans bring out the most foolish impulses in me. The next words from my mouth were very ill considered indeed, from the standpoint of wanting to survive, but I cannot stop them. You killed Bertilkin. Why? Because he learned about this? I gestured toward the dragon bones. Rossi's mouth twisted. No, because he was sniffing around the smugglers too much. Knife reflecting gold in the light, he advanced a step towards me. Wait! I flung my hands up to stop him. The hand bearing Gretelkin's ring. Not a very wise choice, but there was the faintest chance that my scientific conclusions might do some good. Please, you must listen. You saw the bones in the cave, didn't you? Or Kurzov did. That's how you knew it was possible to preserve dragon bones after death. You must know they used that cave for a graveyard. The dragons do. They mourn their dead, don't you see? And what if they do? He said impatiently. I doubted a moral argument would sway him, but a pragmatic one might. That's why they're attacking people. I'm sure of it, because you killed so many of them, and likely because you haven't let them carry off their dead. It has made them angry. If you continue on like this, more people will die. His lip curled, and he answered with disdain, Peasants. His next words were cut off by footsteps coming in a staccato rush down the stairs. I had never before heard that sound in such a panic. But even so, I recognized my husband's step. I opened my mouth to call out with what word I will never know. But Rossi had no more patience with intruders. As Jacob came off the stairs, the Chiavorin turned and plunged the knife into his gut. The horror of that sight paralyzed me from my hands to my voice. I could not even shriek, but Dagmira was not thus frozen. She had been waiting for Rossi's distraction, and when it came, she moved without hesitation, snatching up a jar and smashing it over the man's head. Rossi went down like a felled tree. The chemical that spilled over his head and shoulders was soon joined by more as he collapsed sideways onto a table and then to the floor, taking glassware and lamps with him. His fall broke my paralysis at last. Jacob had staggered backward against the wall. I rushed to his side, one hand hovering over the crimson stain that flowered across his shirt. I knew how to draw the body. I did not know how to fix it. Jacob fumbled in his pocket, came up empty-handed. The motion roused me to my own search. I found a handkerchief and, after a brief hesitation, pressed it to the wound. Jacob covered my hand with his own and met my gaze. What he saw there must have alarmed him, for he put on something like a smile and said, I'll be all right, Isabella. I would have liked to believe him, but the blood seeping through the handkerchief was hot against my fingers. From behind From behind me, Dagmira spoke in an unsteady voice. He is the one who killed Gendrick. Rossi. We'd spoken in Chiavoran. She would have understood nothing but the name. I turned enough to put the fallen man in my field of view, but he showed no sign of rousing. Yes, him, or someone else involved with this scheme. He was the one who had stabbed Jacob, though, and that was more than enough guilt for me. I had spoken of there being a dragon inside me. For the first time, I felt it not just in the yearning for freedom, but in the predator's desire for the kill. Could I have done it? Could I have slipped my hand from beneath Jacob's, picked up the knife or a shard of glass, and murdered Rossi where he lay? I do not know. I would like to think not. There is something dreadful about believing one's 19-year-old self could cut the throat of a fallen man, whatever his crimes might be, but I never made the choice. Jacob spoke before I could, and the moment slipped past. I wonder sometimes whether he sensed my thoughts in the rigidity of my hand and intervened before I could resolve myself one way or the other. Dagmira, go rouse the others. We must be out of here tonight before Kurzov can discover that we have learned his secret. We'll meet them at the stables. Isabella, is there anything with which to bind Rossi? Dagmira went, moving like a Hingese automaton. I found a length of rubber tubing and used Rossi's fallen knife to cut it into lengths suitable for binding his feet and hands. A few sheets of paper and a third bit of tubing sufficed for a gag. Jacob remained against the wall, not moving to help. I tried to think of what that meant. Would he be able to ride? He must. My task done, I moved to help him up the stairs, but stopped when we reached the bottom step. Wait. Jacob steadied himself as I turned back. Jumping over Rossi's prone body, I snatched up the Chiavoran's notebook and then fetched the first portable bone that came in hand, a wishbone, proof of what he had done. Now we can go. Chapter 23. Departure without farewells, searching for shelter, a detour to the ruins, more answers there, many of them unpleasant, the arrival of the dragons. I almost turned back at the beginning of our flight, when we had saddled some of Kurzov's horses and ruined the tack of the rest, and were set to put that place behind us forever because a glimmer of light caught my eye. Steadying my husband in the saddle, I said very quietly, Jacob, there's a fire. The others heard. Dagmira growled something that might have been let them burn. For my own part, I did not realize I'd begun to move until Jacob clutched desperately at my arm. Isabella, you cannot. There are innocents in there, I said too loudly, softer but with no less intensity. I went on. Kurzov and Rossi may be monsters, but what of their servants? Guilt prodded me as much as altruism. I saw my husband's white, drained face in the night and knew our hope of survival depended on fleeing straight away, and yet I could not sacrifice all those men on the altar of our own preservation. Mr. Wilker growled and flung himself from the saddle, running for the stable where he had left a watchman, a boy, really, tied up while he stole the horses. A moment later, he was back out, setting his gelding into motion, even as he spoke. He'll rouse the household. You realize that means they'll be on our trail faster. He realized it too, and yet he had gone. None of us wanted the atrocity on our heads. It made the nightmare of our flight even worse, though. We could not ride at speed, though, through the mountain night, even with the half moon to light our way. And although we had done what we could to hamper pursuit, we knew Kurzov's men would be following us. Not even following. They knew where we were going. Um, or so they would think. Dagmir and Ilgis consulted in quiet whispers, too rapid to follow, and they proposed that we go where Kurzov would not expect, to the ruins. There was the huntsman's hut where Astamir, Lord Hilford, and I had spent the night after our visit, or we could attempt shelter in the ruins themselves. Ilgis volunteered to slip into the village on his own to gather up what he could of our more valuable possessions. Then, I suppose, we would go south, back to Chiavora, back to Skirland, leaving behind our notes and equipment, and Lord Hilford's beloved armchair, and the people of Justanev. We're going to have to stop it here, I believe. We are almost done with the book. There's only a few pages left. But, anyways, we've been reading A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir of Lady Trent, a book by Marie Brennan. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me anyway, all the information will be in the description below. Also, you can join the Discord server. Anyways, with all that being said, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.